Question number 10, Dr. David Clark.
My question is to the Minister and asks, does the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's expenditure of $43,000 on a sign show it is achieving one of its principal goals of realising efficiency gains over time?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, well, firstly, while the cost and installation of the sign itself was $43,490, I was advised before the House today there were a number of associated costs which I'd like to take the opportunity to keep the House informed of now. This is more than $900 for lighting, $13,500 for construction and installation costs of the foundation, $2,000 for resource consents, plus fees and margins for the construction company. Yes, it is in addition to the total of $67,339, Mr Speaker. So, in answer to the member's question, no, I don't think it is indicative of the broader efficiency gains that are being achieved, and in fact it underlines what I've said previously. The cost is clearly over the top, and I've made that very clear to the Chief Executive of MB and have sought and received a strong assurance that nothing like this will be spent on signage again.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Was the $360,000 his department spent on comfort couches, motorised desks and Apple stalls part of the same program of realising efficiency gains over time?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, in fact, the article the member is relying on for that was incorrect in some details. The motorised tables were not purchased, and the prices around the sofas was incorrect as well. However, the member makes a valid point overall. It is part of the overall cost of the shift of the agency, which will save us $40 to $50 million for taxpayers over 20 years, on top of the savings from merging the agencies, which are around the $9 million a year mark. But nevertheless, I agree with the member that those costs are over the top, and I have made that clear to the Chief Executive.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Did he choose the colour of the small business sector report, instruct landscape over portrait orientation of the same document, and criticise the clarity of language that was cut and pasted from his own previous report?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, we're really on the big issues here. I can confirm for the member one thing, is that I often criticise the lack of clarity of written information and seek that it be clarified. But beyond that, I think the rest of it's up to the member's imagination.
Supplementary question.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr. David.
I seek leave to table an internal email released under the Official Information Act, dated 24 February 2014, which shows the Minister's demand for changing a document to landscape style.
The email's been described. I'll put the leave is sought to table it. Is there any objection? There is none. It can be.
Point of order.
Order. Order. This is a point of order. Point of order, Dr. David.
I seek leave to table an internal email dated 18 February 2014, where officials ask him to choose between colour options.
Order. Leave is sought to table that particular document. Any objection? I think there may well. Was there objection from my left? No, there was not. It can be.
And point of order. I seek leave to table a third exchange of emails. It is.
Right.
Dated 23rd of February 2014, where it's recorded that the Minister, despite officials borrowing language directly from his own previous document, insisted on clearer language.
Leave is sought to table that particular email. Any objection? There is none. It can be tabled.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark. Order.
Who is the Minister responsible to this House for the expenditure referred to in my primary question and also in the last two supplementaries?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Minister responsible for MB is myself, and I have made it absolutely clear to the Chief Executive that I do not condone the expenditure on the sign, and he has accepted that and given me a very clear assurance. Overall, the industry has done a good job in reducing costs, and actually through the move to refurbished building, unlike the new buildings that the Labor government used to build all the time all around Wellington, that they've actually saved $40 to $50 million over 20 years, and on top of that, the merger will save around $9.5 million a year. But nevertheless, those particular items were over the top.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Is his official's assessment accurate that the minister does not know what he wants until often he sees what he does not want?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, golly gosh, Mr. Speaker. This is a case of the member perhaps burying the lead, but nevertheless, I think ministers often decide what they want once they've seen something they don't want. I don't think this is a particularly marvellous revelation from the member.
Question number 11, Dr. Kennedy Graham.